My name is Julia Kilson, and I'm also a student with the University of Washington's Engage program. And like Lisa, I study events of ancient climate change, but I study climate change using ancient soils. And as a graduate student, I get really specialized training in how to do a very specific type of research. The Engage program, however, gave me another type of training that graduate students rarely get. I learned how to talk about my science in a way that is engaging, enlightening, and informative. You can learn more about our Engage program at engage-science.com.
Waved and then I'll come up and help you.
I would also like to mention that the best way to keep up with the Town Halls program is to become a member. Membership offers downfront seating, discounts on book and ticket purchases, and a mailed copy of Town Hall's monthly calendar. And it provides the support essential to bringing you more than 400 events annually at affordable ticket prices. And now to our second guest. Jillian Lyles, a master's student in School of Marine and Environmental Affairs at UW, will explore global notions of ocean stewardship and what Western science can learn from them. She'll offer an overview of these different notions, including those held by local and indigenous people, that, when bridged into our management schemes, would work better to conserve our ocean resources. Please give a warm welcome to Jillian Lyles.
Ever since I was a kid, I've been drawn to the ocean. And despite the fact that I'm from landlocked Cleveland, Ohio, in 7th grade I decided that I wanted to be a marine biologist. All that to say, I think the ocean's really cool. Did you know that the ocean makes up 71% of our planet? 71%, that's 3/4 of the planet. And if that isn't cool enough, every time you breathe, thank the ocean, because it produces more than half of the oxygen in the atmosphere. The ocean also absorbs most of the carbon within the atmosphere, so all of the warming that Elisa was talking about, it would be a lot hotter without the ocean. The ocean also helps regulate weather and brings us clouds and fresh water, and I know that we don't always like the rain in Seattle, but it's good for the ecosystem. So the ocean is just part of this beautiful cycle of life. And the place on the planet that I fell in love with the ocean is the island of Hawaii. I was fortunate enough to spend some time there during my undergraduate career, and now I work there doing some graduate work with some community partners. And I can say for certain that my experience there has truly changed the way that I see the world. There's something we can all learn from island communities. If I've learned one thing in life, it's that we have so much to learn from each other, but something about the idea of sustainability really rings true on islands. There's something about being on an island that makes you realize how finite your resources are. And living sustainably isn't just an idea that you practice for fun or because you're a progressive liberal, but it's because it's something you have to do, because you only have what you have. At least on the Hawaiian Islands, the environment and taking care of the land and not controlling it, an idea that I grew up with here in the US. The idea of caring for your land is embedded in their culture. And I'll get more into specifics about Hawaii and my research a little later, but first I want to tell you a little bit about my field. So my work lies at the intersection of ocean conservation and policy, and the reason why this intersection is so important is because, like I said earlier, the ocean impacts virtually everyone. And conserving this valuable resource is essential to our survival as a human race. Not to sound or make you guys go into a panic, but we might not feel the pressure of our resources running out like island communities do, but the pressure is definitely there. So one of my jobs as a researcher and as a scientist is to inform our policy decisions that regulate human activity around the ocean. In doing so, I'm making sure that we're not causing too much environmental degradation, but people are still allowed to do what they need to do. And in our Western world, we manage human activity, at least on a large scale, by electing officials or hiring expert managers to make our decisions. And typically, science is used to inform those decisions. So during my graduate career, the main question that I ponder is, should decision makers rely on science alone to answer all of our environmental problems? Because more often than not, that's the case. Problems surrounding the ocean and coastal governance are inherently wicked, as we'd say in the field, meaning that they're complicated, typically ongoing, and have no technical solution. So let me give you an example. Fisheries management is wicked. This refers to how we manage the global industry of fishing and the direct and indirect effects that has on people and the environment. It's estimated that fisheries and aquaculture support close to 12% of the world population. So that's about 900 million people. And to put that into context, that's 3 times the amount of people in the US. So fisheries management is complicated because it involves a lot of people. First, you have the people that are directly employed, so the fishers themselves, the people who process the fish, then you have people who work in the market or export industry. So if you've ever been to Pike's Place Market and had a fish thrown at you, they're all employed directly from fishing. You have people who are indirectly employed by fishing, so you have people who sell or maintenance boats or fishing gear. You also have all the people that make management decisions, all the scientists that inform those decisions, all the people that eat fish, and I could go on and on and on. So it's a lot of people. It's also complicated because ecology is complicated. And when you take a large quantity of one organism out of a system as complex as the ocean, there are going to be ripple effects. And scientists do their best job at trying to figure out what's going to happen using models and research, but we can't figure it all out. Second, it's an ongoing problem because as long as we eat fish, and there are fish in the ocean to eat, we will always have a fishery problem. Sorry for those who like Finding Nemo. And thirdly, there's no right way to fix the problem. We can't stop fishing, but we can't constantly fish. We can put caps on the number of fish allowed to be caught, or we can restrict the type of gear that fishers use and regulate catch that way. We could ban fishing altogether and just farm fish. All of these solutions have their costs and their benefits, with none being the silver bullet to prevent overfishing. So when you look at the fundamentals, it totally makes sense that marine and environmental problems are inherently wicked, because these problems include 2 of the most complex systems on the planet: the ocean, or the environment as a whole, and human civilization. And when you bring these 2 things together and you try to manage human actions around the ocean, and you try to manage the ocean around human actions, it's not surprising that effective solutions that make everyone happy are few and far between. And this concept of wickedness, just so you know, can be applied to more than just environmental issues. In fact, any issue that has a social component is usually wicked. So any social justice issue is inherently wicked. So if it helps you to think about it in this sense, please do. And the key to solving wicked problems is to understand the nature of the problem. And to truly understand the nature of the problem, we need to diversify the voices that we use and that we listen to. Because without a diversity of voices, we're left with an impartial understanding. And like I said earlier, in order for us to solve wicked problems, it's important for us to understand the complete picture of what is occurring and why. And in our Western world, we turn to science for understanding. Science is how we make sense of the world, and we use it to answer the biggest questions of time. We turn to science to figure out how things work, why things interact in the way they do, and how to fix our problems. But unfortunately, science, in its current state, is not good at providing this full picture. If you look up science in Webster's dictionary, it's defined as the state of knowing. And this is distinguished from ignorance and misunderstanding, so it's really a true understanding of what's taking place. So no wonder why we turn to science to answer all of our problems. And to do science, we use a very formalized method known as the scientific method. It starts by asking a question or addressing a problem. Then you research to understand more about your subject. Then you answer your own question based on your research. You make your most educated guess, or what we say is you form your hypothesis. And after that, you design your own experiment to test if your hypothesis is correct. And then you get data, you analyze it, and usually you're left with so many more questions that you do more research. And you feed back into this loop, you feed back into this cycle of science. It's either that or you draw conclusions and you win the science fair, but it's usually the former. And in this cycle of science, as academics and as scientists in this Western world, when we do research, we typically only read material produced by the academic institution. We then draw our hypotheses based on that knowledge and some of our prior life experiences, and then we design experiments with a basis in this Western world. So with all that said, as a scientist, I would like to say that we as scientists are limited, and alone we cannot provide this full picture, this full knowing of what's taking place. We can definitely provide a scientific knowing, which tells us a lot, but it only provides us with one perspective. And with something as big and as complex and as complicated as our environment, it's really important that we understand more than one perspective. And fortunately for us, there are other ways of knowing, or what we call diverse knowledge systems in which we can understand the world. So let's just start with, what is a knowledge system? A knowledge system is made up of agents, practices, institutions that organize the production, transfer, and use of knowledge. So for science, the agent is the scientist, the practices are the scientific method, and the institution are scientific institutions, for example, a university. So scientists use the scientific method to produce knowledge, and then they transfer it within a scientific institution, and then they tell people how to use it or they use it themselves. Another knowledge system is local knowledge, which we refer to as knowledge that is held by a specific group of people who understand a local phenomena. And there are many examples of local knowledge holders. You probably are a local knowledge holder and you don't even know it. Another example of a local knowledge holder are the people in the Philippines who experienced the tropical typhoon that Elisa was talking about. Most of the people who experienced that storm hold local knowledge about what happened. They can probably describe to you about the conditions that led up to the storm and the consequent aftermath. And some of them might tell you that it was the most severe storm of their lifetime. In fact, many island nations can talk about recent environmental changes and provide insight into climate change signals that scientists cannot. Another example of local knowledge holders are the people of Flint, Michigan, who held knowledge about what was happening to the water supply before anyone was taking action. Maybe they couldn't tell you why the water was bad, but they could tell you what was happening to them, they could tell you what was happening to their kids, they could tell you for how long, and so many other things. Another form of knowledge is indigenous knowledge, which is sometimes referred to as traditional knowledge, and that's defined as local knowledge, but it's held by indigenous people, or it's unique to a given culture or a society. And unlike local knowledge, indigenous knowledge refers to knowledge that is time-tested and multi-generational. In my own research, I partner with Native Hawaiians to bridge their indigenous knowledge with Western management. Just a little history about Hawaii. Before European contact in 1778, Native Hawaiians lived on the main Hawaiian Islands for over 1,500 years. So deeply embedded in their stories and in their culture and in their traditions is a deep understanding of Hawaii's ecology. The knowledge that they hold includes a deep understanding of how the islands were formed geologically, how the moon cycle is related to fish behavior, and how to sustainably grow and harvest food, intricately developed through aquaculture and agriculture system. And these supported over 1 million people on the islands. Yet again, another knowledge system is practitioner knowledge, or knowledge held by a group of people with a specific, in a specific field with practical experience. For example, I'll use the fisheries example. Fishers hold knowledge about fish. They can tell you about fish movement, fish behavior, and locations better than anyone else. So in times when we're seeking knowledge and solutions about fisheries and other related problems, it's best to consult the people whose livelihoods depend on fish. And so the combination of these different knowledge systems is what we call diverse knowledge systems. Separately, these systems provide insight into the inner workings of our world by utilizing distinguishing agents, practices, and institutions that form that system's culture. And when we bridge these knowledge systems together with one another, they contribute to generate an enriched picture of a selected problem or issue of concern. And this enriched picture can serve as a legitimate starting point for further analysis and knowledge generation. Something I'd like to point out is that when we're thinking about knowledge, we want to think about knowledge as content and knowledge as process. So knowledge as content is probably what you usually think about knowledge. So it's information that can be passed from one person to another. Where knowledge as process is a way of observing, discussing, and making sense of information. For example, elders or other knowledge holders from indigenous groups, they don't only transmit knowledge, but they teach you what to observe and how to look for what is important. So when scientific knowledge and indigenous knowledge are used together, they can give us a better understanding of changing climatic conditions and other climate change impacts. So this all sounds great, right? And to me, it's common sense that when there's no one person or one culture or one knowledge system that has all the answers. And when bridged together, they help us understand better. I'd like to say that I'd like to stand here and tell you that my colleagues are also convinced of this idea. But unfortunately, this notion of utilizing other knowledge systems is not as widespread as you'd think. And the information that you've seen on the screen today is not a major topic from any science class I've taken in my academic career. And for a lot of scientists and other academics, other knowledge systems aren't reliable enough, or they're too subjective, and they don't hold merit, when in actuality we have so much to learn from them. There's a human component to most knowledge systems outside of science. As scientists, we try our hardest to remove the human element from science in order to be objective, because we have this idea that objectivity is true knowledge. But to remove that human element, especially when we're talking about environmental sciences and we're talking about decision making, it only moves us further away from true understanding. And a big part of why I'm here talking to you tonight is because I want to advocate for more voices in decision making. And as a scientist, I don't think that decision makers should rely on science alone to answer all of our environmental problems. I currently work with and have worked with communities who work closely with their environment, and many of them don't have advanced degrees or formal science backgrounds. But I know for a fact that they know their environment better than any scientist with fancy equipment could tell you. In fact, the community that I do work with right now is a great example of bridging knowledge systems. It brings together local knowledge, indigenous knowledge, practitioner knowledge, traditional knowledge, social science knowledge, and natural science knowledge. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. In ancient Hawaii, Hawaiians developed a system of aquaculture called local ia, or fish ponds. Aquaculture, or fish farming, has been used for centuries in various cultures and traditions to harvest and grow fish. And the way that these fish ponds work is that Hawaiians, they formed human chains and passed rocks from the tops of mountains down to the ocean, which you'll see pictures of a little later. And they created these ponds along the shoreline. And then they incorporated gates, which you see on the right, called a makaha. And when open, anything can swim into the pond, but when closed, anything small enough to get through the gate can escape, leaving the big things inside to harvest and grow. Now, with recent threats of declining fish populations and the impact that we have on the entire ecosystem, fish ponds and other aquaculture systems are really great alternatives to traditional fishing practices. And within the last decade, there has been a resurgence to restore these fish ponds to working conditions for cultural, ecological, and economic benefit. Before European contact, there was an estimated of about 500 fish ponds located around the state of Hawaii. However, through time, the systems have fallen into disrepair, and there are currently only a handful that are in operation. The restoration of these ponds can mean a lot to food security in the Hawaiian Islands, and it can also lessen the pressure of overfishing. Currently, Hawaii imports over 80% of its food, even though, as I stated earlier, before European contact, Hawaiians were able to sustain over 1 million lives on the islands. So I've been fortunate enough to work with a group of practitioners that restore these fish ponds around the state of Hawaii, who you've seen pictured in these pictures. Every year, this group called Hui Malama Local Ia, which means the group that takes care of the fish ponds, they share their knowledge about fish pond maintenance and care, as well as they talk about how to continue to sustainably care for the environment. And they hold a great wealth of knowledge about how to care for the nearshore environment, how to harvest fish in a sustainable way, and how to manage these systems in order to feed the community. It's really important to maintain and support these initiatives because they provide an element that scientific knowledge cannot. To these practitioners, taking care of fish ponds and all of the land, being stewards of the earth, it's not just a job to them, but it's a way of life, it's a lifestyle. And this information, or knowledge as process, is a great takeaway message. So what now? Hopefully I've convinced you the power and the importance of diversifying voices in decision making. As for next steps, to all my scientists in the crowd, understand the power that we have to inform decisions. We can no longer do our research in the comfort of our labs and not think about the outside world. So it's important that we're thinking critically and we're aware of our biases and our limitations. It's important that we call on these diverse ways of knowing and knowledge systems, both as content and as process, to help us ask the right questions so that we can be in the cycle of science from the beginning in the right way. And when we're collaborating on projects, make sure you're giving credit to all those who deserve it. And for everyone else, including the scientists, think critically about the information you're hearing. Diversify the stories and the voices that you hear and that you listen to and that you expose yourself to. When you hear something that you disagree with, ask yourself why you disagree with it, and listen to the other person's point of view. And lastly, value and respect other ways of knowing instead of disregarding them, and try to empower them. And if you take anything away today, I hope it's that with some of today's biggest environmental issues facing us, it's important that we're utilizing all types of knowledge to tackle our collective problems. And with that, I'd like to thank the Engage series, Town Hall, the School of Marine and Environmental Affairs, University of Washington, and my partners in Hawaii, KUA and Conservation International. Thank you.